All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Artley. I use he and they pronouns. I'm a white, masculine presenting person in my 30s, wearing a casual button-down shirt in front of my home office, which has lots of shelves and books, lots of dark wood. I'm so excited to have you here for the Arts and Disability Forum, our second iteration. Some housekeeping things. I will let you know that we have our ASL interpreter spotlit. There's also a CC button for captions if you're interested in seeing subtitles that way. And we're also going to have a link to a stream text window, which allows you to look at captions in a separate window if that works better for you. My colleague Sam will also be dropping a link for a PDF or a RTF file in the chat for download, which is slides from today's presentation. Got a few slides to show you some stuff. So if that works for you, feel free to download that and look at that, or just it'll be coming up on the screen. We'll be visually describing them as well. Wanted to let you know also that this event is currently being streamed on Facebook. So if that works better for you to watch that there, if you want to share and shout out, feel free to do that from the MRAC Facebook page. We'll also be archiving this on the MRAC YouTube channel for future viewing. And for those of you in the future who are watching this, you can translate captions into additional languages if you wish. We will have a section for questions at the end of this presentation, the presentation by our panelists. So feel free to drop any thoughts, questions, compliments, kudos, or your own comments about your own experiences into the chat. We'd really love to make that an active space. So with that, again, welcome to the Arts and Disability Forum. This is part of a series of public conversations about issues that are important to the community of artists and arts groups that MRAC supports. We had our first Arts and Disability Forum last fall and got to hear about 4 perspectives of 4 artists with disabilities. It was a really wonderful, engaging conversation. We at MRAC believe that leadership is so critical in the art world. And we recognize that people with disabilities experience systemic barriers to leadership due to ableism. So we wanted to have a conversation highlighting the ways that groups are putting people with disabilities in positions of real power. And so I'm really excited to bring these amazing panelists here tonight who will tell us about their work. And then we'll have this public conversation that you're a part of about disability and power. So with that, I will introduce our first panelist, Jess Reyes. Jess is an interdisciplinary artist, organizer, and art facilitator practicing mixed media art, video, and more. She identifies as queer, feminist, and punk. Her artwork is rooted in play, vulnerability, experimentation, collaboration, and the blending of disciplines. She has exhibited and screened her artwork throughout the Twin Cities, and an extension of her practice is community organizing and resource building for artists. I will say I'm going to give very short versions of these bios going forward, but if you're interested in seeing the full one, check out literally all of our marketing. So with that, I'm going to have each panelist answer this question that we all collectively decided would be a great way to highlight some of the great ways, the possibilities. So with that, Jess, what do you think is the possibility of an accessible world?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I think it's really important. I essentially think of just words that symbolize many meanings. And so I think of words like inclusivity, I think about empowerment, I think about visibility, I think about strength, compassion. I also think of one of my favorite words, community. And so I feel like that's what I see when I think of the possibility of accessibility.
Wonderful, thank you. Agree. I feel like I'm constantly looking for synonyms for the word community, but really it just comes down to community in the end, right? Mm-hmm. So next up is Bryan Boyce, who's the founder and executive director of Cow Tipping Press, which is a social venture that teaches and publishes writing by people with intellectual developmental disabilities. His work is grounded in the experience as a sibling of a brother with disabilities and educator in diverse cultural contexts. He's won plenty of awards. So Bryan, if you could tell us, what is the possibility of an accessible world?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a lot of things. I think it's a more empathetic world where we all understand our inherent interdependence and how we're all in this together, and where that empathy also extends to other forms of identity, inequity, marginalization. I think it's a joyful world. It's a dynamic world. It's an unpredictable world. It is a brilliant world. A good example, there's a college in the Twin Cities that built out kind of a program to include people with intellectual and developmental disabilities specifically on its campus. And in some of their promo materials, there's an interview with one of the regular students on campus. And she just says, "My school now feels complete. We didn't know what we were missing." So I think it's also a more complete world and communities.
That's great. I love that very tangible example of that. Didn't know that how complete you needed to be. All right, and finally is Mai Thor, who's a 2021 Bush Fellow. Mai seeks to develop a community-informed disability justice framework to incorporate into social justice work and systems throughout Minnesota. As a person living with a disability and as a leader who has helped design more accessible and inclusive systems with people with disabilities, she sees the social justice movements often leave disability out of their efforts. So Mai, if you wouldn't mind telling us, what do you think is the possibility of an accessible world?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I like everything that both Jess and Bryan brought up. I think, when the possibilities are, I think, endless, right? And I think that, I was just thinking about an article that a friend shared with me recently about a woman who acquired a disability later on in life, which, we all know is different from like folks who maybe were born with disabilities or maybe acquired their disabilities when they were younger. And it really, I think, impacted her because all her life she identified as a performer, as a dancer. And so she was sort of like, well, what do I do with my life now, that I can't walk? And I think when I think of possibilities, I think of how do I really see myself? Like, who am I truly as a person, right? Beyond the ability, beyond how my body functions. And what are some of these social constructs that have really defined those things for me in my identity? And so that's, that's what I think about when I think of possibilities, is like, how do we really, truly meet ourselves and our, who we truly are as people to really like sort of release all of these possibilities that can happen.
That's such a wonderful sentiment, and I will echo that as someone who identifies as disabled and really came into that later in life. I fully get that too, so thank you. Well, Mai, I'm going to kick it back to you if that's cool, to start off a section where we've asked these panelists to prepare a little bit of presentation, casual though, telling us about their work and its connection to the theme tonight. So if you wouldn't mind, Mai, and then we're going to do a screen share with the presentation, which again, you can download if you wish through a link in the chat.
Thank you. All right. And so I'm just going to jump right into it, if that's okay. And again, my name is Mai, and I'm a Hmong American woman in her 20s. No, I'm kidding. I'm actually 44. But I have dark hair. It's also pink right now. You just, for folks who can see me, you can't see that it's pink because I have it up. And I am wearing a gray sweater and like orange tank top, and I'm sitting in front of my closet in my bedroom. So that's a little visualization of what I'm doing right now, where I'm at. And I'm so happy to be here tonight with the group to share a little bit about the possibility of an accessible world. And I'm going to be talking about disability justice. So that's the lens that I'm using. Scott, I'm going to rely on you to give me the 2-minute, warning, if that's okay, because I could talk all day, folks, seriously. So I'm a 2021 Bush Fellow, as Scott mentioned already, and let's go to the first slide. Before I jump into disability justice, I need to call out Bush, because I wouldn't be able to do the work that I'm doing today without them, and I really need to give them credit. I'm part of the 2021 cohort, and it's been an amazing experience. If any of y'all are interested in learning more about being a Bush Fellow and how that happens, how you can apply for that, feel free to reach out to me. Actually, Bush, I think, just announced their most recent cohort, the 2022 cohort. So it's an annual fellowship, that they award to folks every year. And there's about 25 people that they choose every year. And it's a leadership development opportunity that not everybody gets in their lifetime. So I am very humbled to be able to be in front of all of you tonight as a Bush Fellow working on disability justice. And that's really how I see an accessible world is going to be possible. I want to just make sure that we all kind of, understand the distinction between disability justice versus disability rights, even though I don't have any of that information on this slide. So disability rights, most folks, I think, tend to understand that model a little bit more better than disability justice. Disability justice is a more newer, younger movement that's been happening with disabled folks. Disability rights is really like, throughout history, how have folks with disabilities fought to, get, equity and inclusion, and it's more of a civil rights framework, which are all great, right? I mean, like, my life would not be the same without ADA, right? But ADA and disability rights is different, because disability justice really addresses the individual with a disability as a whole. And it really does center intersectionality as a key component to our people, because disability is not a monolith, right? And we all know that. We all know that disability can impact anybody, no matter our skin color, our immigrant status, our gender, all of that stuff. And so that's the real grounding sort of mindset behind disability justice. And there are actually 10 principles that are rooted in this movement. And I'll go through those real quick here. The first one I've already mentioned is intersectionality. Secondly, we've got leadership of the most impacted, anti-capitalism, cross-movement solidarity, wholeness, sustainability, cross-disability solidarity. We can go on to the next slide. The eighth principle is interdependence. And I think we heard Bryan mention that a little bit earlier. Collective access, and then collective liberation. And, that's a lot, right? I could probably talk about all 10 of these all night, but and some of this stuff is not real plain language friendly, but I just want to pull out like one or two that I feel are really important to understand with the disability justice framework, which is interdependence. I love interdependence. I love that principle, because it really talks about like how everything we do impacts one another, despite ability level. And our people, our communities, we're all connected, right? And we all acknowledge that we share the land that we're living on right now, which once belonged to Indigenous folks and still does, but not in the same way that it used to. And that we all use the same systems around us too, right? And that a lot of those systems are very oppressive and, you know, does not allow some of us to have the same kind of power that other people do, right? So just wanted to highlight interdependence, and I feel like it's a really good way to encapsulate what disability justice is all about. So let's go on to the next slide. Now I just want to pivot a little bit and transition to talking about ableism. There are lots of different definitions out there in regards to ableism. One of my favorite disability justice advocates is Tia Lewis, and they have a wonderful definition of ableism. It's a little long, I didn't include it here, but for me, what I like to tell folks is that pretty simply put, ableism is the oppression of disabled folks. You know, I think it's also a little bit of a, you know, it's a term that I think a lot of people are not real familiar with, just like disability justice itself as a whole, as a movement. But it really is about a mindset about towards folks with disabilities as, you know, being seen inferior or not as whole of a person as other folks who don't have disabilities, right? And, you know, ableism exists everywhere. It exists in all the systems that we use. It exists in all the environments that we take up space in. It can be obvious and apparent, so like you can identify it right away, right? Or it could be subtle and microaggressive. And the example that I like to use all the time is myself. Ableism happens to me pretty much every single day as a woman with a disability who is a wheelchair user. And a great example for me and my lived experience is when I go to a restaurant with a friend who isn't disabled, who's able-bodied, or who is, you know, able-bodied presenting, the waiter never asks me what I want for dinner or what I want to have to eat or to drink. They will always ask my companion, my friend that I come with. That's ableism right there. And that's not super obvious because a lot of my able-bodied friends have, you know, like that goes over their head usually, but I feel it right away, right? And I'm like, yeah, I'm the one who wants to order and who's going to be eating or drinking here, so just ask me, right? But that's a perfect example of ableism that could be microaggressive or a little bit more subtle and not easy to catch right away. So let's go on to the next slide, which is my last slide. And you know, there's a lot to unpack when it comes to disability justice. I've like only covered a teeny tiny bit of it, but there are things that we can do, right, to put disability justice into practice. And I'll share a few of them with you here. The first thing is obviously to, as much as you can, ground yourself in those 10 principles that I just talked about. And remember that what we do has an impact on everybody around us, right? We're in this together. We need to, you know, be firm in this solidarity as we navigate through this whole sea of making sure that folks with disabilities also achieve justice along with everybody else. And remember that we should not be leaving anybody behind, right? We move together in this, and only together can we really achieve freedom and liberation. So let's go to the next slide. I think I have one more slide, or maybe a couple more. Commit to being anti-ableist, right? So after George Floyd was murdered, how many of y'all were like, we need to commit to being anti-racist, right? I know a lot of y'all did. Well, if you can commit to being anti-racist, you can also commit to being anti-ableist. And you're probably like, well, what does that even mean? Well, it's actually very similar. And, you know, it just means that you're going to, from this point on, not, you know, practice anything or, you know, put into action anything that will be oppressive towards folks with disabilities, just as you would with our Black and brown brothers and sisters, right? But here are some more concrete examples. Stop perpetuating the supremacy of having of not having a disability, right? Just because you don't identify as a disabled doesn't make you any better than folks who do identify as disabled. Recognize that people with disabilities are experts at their own access needs. Avoid inspiration porn. And I don't have time to talk too much about inspiration porn. Maybe we can have that conversation offline one day. But let me just tell you this. The telethons that Jerry Lewis used to always do, those were inspiration porn. Don't buy into that, okay? Do not buy into that. And of course, call out ableism when you see it happening. If you have a disabled friend that you're going out to dinner with and the waiter only talks to you and not them, stop that, okay? Call that out and call it out when you see ableism happening in other spaces all the time. So those are some of those concrete examples about how you can put disability justice into practice. And I don't know if I have another slide, Sam, but you can just go on. Oh, yep, I think this is the last one. These are some resources for all y'all. I encourage you to take a look. I think MRAC will be sharing them at some point anyway. So if you feel like you didn't get a chance to really like capture them, I'm sure you could reach out to MRAC or to me individually. I'm happy to always talk more or share more. But these are really good resources that I go back to all the time. I return to these resources all the time to really put into practice disability justice. So that's all I have. Thank you so much. And I'll pass it on to Scott again.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I'm ASL clapping right now. So applause. Thank you so much for sharing. It's so great to hear from the kind of work that you're looking into. The concrete, again, that sort of tangible vision I have in my head of you at dinner being disempowered, the assumption that you don't have agency, that you can't order on your own. Like that's such a vivid example of ableism. So thank you. Next. Okay.
This is Sam. Scott, I'm going to interrupt you. You kind of cut out a bit, and I think you were just introducing Jess Reyes, who's going to chat next.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I had some internet difficulties. I am coming to you from Fresh Eye Gallery in South Minneapolis, and I thought the internet was going to be reliable here. And so I'm joining you from my phone now, which I hope the data on my phone will also hold out for at least 10 minutes here. So I'm Jess Reyes, and I am a white woman with chin length, brown hair. I have some kind of like turquoise greeny streak frames my face. I have green glasses on. I am sitting in front of like kind of a drapey red curtain. So if you've seen Twin Peaks, you might be able to get that reference. I feel like I'm in a David Lynch movie. And I have a lot going on with my outfit right now. I've got like a yellow sweater with sparkly things on it. And I also have a patterned kind of vintage looking dress that says fabric on it. So my pronouns are she, her, but I also really love to go by they, them. And I've been slowly transitioning to taking over those pronouns for myself. I am excited and honored to be here with you today. I believe sharing is a resource, and I love to come together with others to exchange ideas. I'm going to read from something I prepared, mostly because I want to stay within the time limit, but I'm going to be sharing about parts of my life related to my disabilities that I haven't really shared publicly about before. And so I feel like I am very thankful for a space like this that I can openly talk about things that I don't always get to. So what I have written kind of reads like a manifesto, which really excites me. And I think it's growing into something I can expand on and maybe even continue writing about. So for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about, my background, my art practice, my passion for supporting creative freedom in others. I see creative freedom as a form of leadership, as a form of power in a space that we can occupy in different ways. But most of what I will share with you is more about my approach and perspective on using art as a tool for community, for empowerment, for connection. There's a lot of talk about access to the arts as well as a need for it, which I fundamentally believe in. But what about access to leadership in the arts and positions of power for artists with disabilities? I feel that this forum is opening the conversation to talk about this as something necessary. When I think of leadership, I like to think about it more broadly, more like a spectrum. Leadership can be visibility. Leadership can be picking your own path. Leadership can be about positions of self-power and showing up for yourself. So again, I'm Jess Reyes. I am an interdisciplinary artist practicing in many mediums, as Scott had nicely shared with you all. I love shapes, patterns, bright colors, curvy, uneven lines, watercolor, collage, paper, yarn, found images. My work is rooted in play. I love to experiment. I love to collaborate. DIY approaches are pretty much the vein of my existence. And I love to blend different art disciplines. I live in St. Paul in the Frogtown neighborhood, but I grew up in Southern California. I moved to Minnesota in 2005 after college. If you want to know more about why I did that and why I stayed, we can talk later. I was raised by my mom, Patricia, who lived with multiple disabilities, and my stepdad, Alberto, who immigrated to the US from Peru. I identify as feminist, punk, and queer. I'm also an artist living with disabilities. Anxiety has been a chronic mental illness I have experienced throughout my life. It has impacted me in many ways. I also live with a disability in my left wrist from a traumatic work injury many years ago. I was born premature, which impacted my development, including being born with a disability in my left ankle. For the first 3 years of my life, I walked on the tips of my toes. I could not walk with my feet flat on the ground. Often I couldn't walk at all. And surgery provided support in addressing this issue, but to this day, I continue to have issues with my leg. And I also have a giant scar to remind me of my recovery and also who I am. I share this as a way of positioning myself as an artist. Who am I? Where do I come from? What have I experienced? Why am I dedicated to supporting artists with disabilities? My art practice is boundless, it's curious, it's nimble, it's often about engaging with others. I'm often working on multiple projects at once because I'm curious, because I'm energetic. I just love to be passionate about art, but also bringing people together, providing arts access services and offering support to other creatives. I truly think that artists are the real social workers or the true social workers of the world. I have to credit a good artist friend of mine, Kira, who also lives with a disability, for helping me define 3 different components of my art practice. I like to blend art and life, each influencing each other. They're interwoven. I don't build boundaries around art and other parts of my life. I need art to be fluid in my life. Otherwise, I won't thrive. Art is a lifestyle for me. I'm open to creating experiences through process and collaboration. I find power in experimenting and not knowing what's to come. I want art to bring people together, to build bridges, to create possibility for new ways of being and radically connecting with others. Art can be something that people learn and do, but it also creates spaces for ourselves to be who we really are, our true selves. Art is a noun, but I also see it as a verb. Sharing these key parts to my being, informs how I show up in my day-to-day life, but also as an artist, organizer, and an art facilitator, which is often my primary mode of expression, movement, and leadership as an artist. I currently get to do this work full time, yay, through my role with Fresh Eye Arts. It's a progressive art studio program supporting artists with disabilities. I also did this while coordinating a Vivo Artworks, a multifaceted art studio program for artists living with mental illness. Some people call this work community arts or social practice, but I like to call it creating or supporting artist communities. My method and approaches are built upon what is known as a progressive studio art model. So I want to share with you some tips that I have learned along the way while facilitating art communities and studios, particularly for self-taught or intuitive artists. These are also practices that come directly from our model at Fresh Eye Arts. I've learned a lot from my colleagues, Lauren Hughes and Chloe Russell-Ching. Everything is a work in progress. So this is just where I currently am as I share these thoughts with you. So feedback is welcome. Use that chat. I know I can learn from you. If you feel comfortable sharing your opinions, your experiences, your reactions to what I have to share, they're all positive, I assure you. But I am so welcoming of an open dialogue. So if you have more to add, I welcome and want that. Art facilitation. So these are my tips as an art facilitator. I see art facilitation or art facilitation sees potential in someone right away and expresses sort of a fun, enthusiastic, accepting, and uplifting energy. It promotes personal expression. The creative voice comes from the artist and not the facilitator. Questions are really important to this process rather than directives. So when in doubt, always communicate with the artist and respect their values. If an artist needs physical assistance in achieving their goal, help them choose an adaptive aid or develop an adaptive aid that could foster more independence and ownership by allowing them to do the artwork themselves. At Fresh Eye, we use things like painters' headbands, rotating easels, and utensil grips to support someone making the art they choose. And we make them available as essential resources for the artist. Visual aids can be also really helpful for an artist to understand the available choices and also helps them communicate their choices by having something to point at when they cannot speak their preference. Art facilitation is also about creating places and spaces that are open, inclusive, and community-oriented, meaning artists work independently but alongside other creatives. And art facilitators model or demonstrate art practices to give people the opportunity to explore and decide on their own if they want to try the art medium or technique. Art facilitators show artists examples or model the art form, but rather than doing or making the art for that person or that artist. And art facilitators favor techniques that support and affirm the artist's autonomy. So when I look to define, the progressive art studio, I lean on Disparate Minds. It's an interdisciplinary project dedicated to increasing visibility for and discussing the work of contemporary and marginalized artists with disabilities. I will make sure to get a link to Disparate Minds in the chat as soon as I'm done here. I quote from their website, "The Progressive Art Studio is a variation on a support model generally known as a dehabilitation program. A typical dehabilitation program mimics a workplace environment and is attended daily, providing training from staff in various kinds of occupational and daily living skills, sometimes very general in nature or specific to maybe some kind of prescriptive or prospective work assignment. The Progressive Art Studio combines this model with a professional artist studio. Rather than completing training, tasks devised and assigned by others, attendees are facilitated by staff who are also artists to navigate the studio environment and understand its potential for productive work of their own devising through the creation of art. Rather than attempting to simplify tasks that are counterintuitive to the individual, the Progressive Art Studio strives to empower one to become productive using the work practices that are intuitive to them already." Unquote. Progressive Art Studios work on a model of acceptance rather than assimilation. An acceptance methodology means beginning with the potential of the person served, of the artist, and conforming ideas to meet the potential with an open-ended approach. This radical method depends on the involvement of those at every level of the studio, including the work facilitator or the work of facilitators, those in management. They must be connected to art as well. The progressive art studio, sort of in that vein or that model, is an integrated, active and meaningful space full of peers who understand the importance of the studio in an artist's life and workflow. Artists should have access to high quality materials in this kind of studio setting. They need to be able to accomplish their creative goals. They should also feel a sense of ownership and autonomy within their creative spaces. There should be open spaces where all can come together, but each practicing artist of that studio must have their own workstation that they can call their own and use as they wish, much like the facilitation of autonomy over their creative ideas. The space itself is important, equitable. It's an element of fostering independence, providing more power to their art practice. An extension of the progressive studio is the gallery. I am sitting in Fresh Eye Gallery right now. And through galleries or the gallery of that studio, shows foster connections with other artists, with and without disabilities. In addition, the handling and the display of the work in an exhibition space sets an important example in the community for valuing the ideas and experiences of those living with disabilities. The studio and the gallery, also offer spaces for community. I've already mentioned that's one of my favorite words. I know it seems kind of hokey, but it is. It's one of my, I'm not gonna lie, it makes me happy, it makes me smile, because that means that we have found our people and we can continue to create new spaces that host our people. When we come together, we can eliminate stigmas, we can eliminate misinformation, we can celebrate our diversity, and what I think can support intentional inclusivity. When we can create our utopia by using art and community as a source for power. Therefore, this is why I work as an art facilitator, as an artist organizer, particularly for artists with disabilities. I know that practicing art in this way can create change. It can build a more inclusive art community that is powerful and accessible. I appreciate this time with you today, and I encourage further dialogues. And I just thank you for listening. Thank you.
This is Scott. Thank you so much. I'm gonna applaud again. I so appreciate learning about your manifesto. I think this is the beginning of the book that I want to read by you. So please continue with that. I really love art as a lifestyle, and it's really demonstrated the way that you help others generate art is how you help people generate power, which is your own empowerment too. So I love it. Thank you. I'm going to push it to our final panelist here, who will present a little bit. If we want to go to Bryan now.
We do. You hear me? See the screen? Cool. I can't see me, but I think that's probably all right. Oh, there we go. Okay. Hi, I'm Bryan. He, him, white man, shaggy hair, plaid shirt, sort of industrial chic office behind me. That's the image. Glad to be here today. I'll try to be punchy, yet cover everything. So cue me if you need me to back up or anything like that. But we'll dive right in. The salient. Ooh. All right, there we go. The salient biographical fact, here about me being here is that I am the sibling of a brother with intellectual and developmental disabilities as well as mental illness. So the picture is a picture of both of us, two young, shaggy, white men with long blonde hair, some beards, a hoodie, arms around each other. And to throw out some numbers, happy to be corrected on this if I'm wrong, but to the best of my knowledge, it's about 20% of people who have a disability, but about 2% who have an intellectual or developmental disability. That's like things like cerebral palsy, autism, Down syndrome, what used to be called the R word. And I think it's valuable to be able to granulate a little bit like that, because too often, even in our most intentionally inclusive spaces, even in places that are really dedicated to disability advocacy, it's that 2% that so often isn't a part of the conversation or might not even have a seat at the table. And I can attest to that just through the diverging life paths and experiences of my brother and me. We were born into the same circumstances, except for this disability being a different thing. And the things I got to do as a young adult in my work, school, home, and recreational lives, I got to go to a college where I met people from all over the world and learned these new ideas that kind of helped shape my worldview. And then I went and I did jobs in a variety of settings where I was living with other people in different circumstances and gaining these professional skill sets and taking risks and seeking out new things, maybe pick up some new friends and hobbies along the way. Whereas my brother, and this is not to disparage anyone who works in the disability services system, is a very tough field, often so under-resourced, and very, very important work, but pretty much, graduated from high school and then moved into a home with other people with disabilities, kind of a rotating cast of characters that he doesn't have a ton of say over who they are. And then has mostly worked in a place with other people with disabilities. And then even ridden transportation between those two places alongside other people with disabilities, this kind of segregated life. And I think some people might hear that and say, well, he's got a disability. It's better than it used to be. This is the best we can do. But I think what I ask when I think about those divergent paths is what kind of supports and structures, dreaming big, would allow my brother to have some of those same opportunities that I had, or his version of what those opportunities to explore and grow and thrive and be the person that you want to be are. Don't want to talk to him too much, for him too much rather. And I think, of course, I can't solve all of those things tonight, probably not even by tomorrow. But I can get at the root of what a lot of that comes from. And I think that is our mindsets, how we think about disability in the first place, right? By virtue of being a sibling, I've had the good fortune to know some of those things I said at the beginning. The quirks, the joy, the heart, the humor, the unpredictability of my brother. That's just really been a gift in my life, and I wish other people had and knew, right? That makes me see disability as a gift, as an asset. But too often still the way we think or talk about disability in society is as something negative, right? A deficit, something to be pitied, a diagnosis, a problem to be solved. And I think one really important place that our mindsets are shaped is in the written word, which is part of why I run the program that I do today, Cow Tipping Press. Founding that is its own story. I won't get into it, but in short, as Scott said, we put on creative writing classes for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and then we publish and celebrate their work. So this picture is a bunch of books that are from our press. All the titles are from writing by people with disabilities. All the art is by people with disabilities, maybe even some who are on this call. Kudos to them. And working in the literary space is pretty cool. There's no other program that we know of really anywhere like this. It's cool because one, it's a space, I think someone earlier said that arts is kind of the vanguard of inclusion. It's the radical activists. It's a space where a lot of things, to generalize, that our students in the classes already do well. Reinventing language, being kind of quirky, expressing things in a different way, being divergent. That's valued in the arts. That's valued in creative writing. It's sometimes what neurotypical writers are trying to train their brains to do. And it's something that our folks do naturally. And so it's a really fantastic space for showing how sometimes, again, disability can make someone more abled than someone without a disability in a weird way. But the other piece is that, again, narratives, including the written word, are where our mindsets are shaped, and we are helping to correct and or contribute to a canon of writing that is by rather than just about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I tell English teachers, readers, you are teaching or you are reading about disability, whether you know it or not. There's portrayals of this population. Usually they're very one-dimensional and you know, unintentional and kind of that inspiration or pity porn that Mai was talking about earlier. So by creating these books, we're also creating tools that people can use, which I have across the country. Plug, you can buy them, look at our website. I think MRAC will share materials too. But as ways to kind of train yourself to think differently about this population and be able to get to know someone like my brother without always being in the same room as them. Anyway, so go to the next slide. I created this program, been running it for about 7 years now. And 2 or 3 years into it, we had this kind of cool thing happen. The picture is a group of our students, as well as support staff, variety of ages, races, genders, kind of excitedly engaged in a class, about a dozen folks or so. And to teach our classes, we hire college students. It's a cool thing about the program. They learn about a population they might not have already connected with. They go off and take that advocacy into, you know, other sectors of society and their career. But some of our students would keep coming back each semester, almost sort of like groupies. And by 2 or 3 years in, there was a point at which the students were telling their teachers, who were new each semester, what was coming next in the lesson plan and what they were supposed to do, kind of the students teaching the teachers. And a light bulb went off and it's like, well, duh, you know, nothing about us without us. And under and unemployment for people with IDD is incredibly high, right? We could be hiring and putting to work in really awesome, meaningful roles our students. And so we created what we call our Apprentices Program. The picture, well, I'll describe, or I'll say this first. I think, again, to my knowledge, we're the only organization that is teaching and publishing writing by, say, someone with Down syndrome on a regular basis. But I also think for sure, we're the only creative writing program that is also hiring people with Down syndrome and other intellectual and developmental disabilities to teach and lead classes. So here we have a young man with Down syndrome writing on a whiteboard. There's a PowerPoint on the wall, and then his teacher, a woman with blue hair on the left side, is looking on. We created this Apprentices Program, and on one level, it was as simple as that, right? We valued disability. We knew about this form of difference. We kind of looked around and asked, where are people with intellectual and developmental disabilities not showing up in our program that they should? And then we made them show up. On the other level, that creating the structures and making them show up and doing that work is a lot of work. A little story about that. We get emails and requests quite regularly, you know, from folks that are like, hey, we'd love, say, for some of your authors to submit to this journal, which is good on that first level, right? They're thinking about people with disabilities, or maybe IDD in particular, and wanting them to show up. But practically, what that looks like for us, that might mean, okay, I'm going to email that author and maybe some family members and some support staff, you know, and then I might not hear back from that email. Okay, then I'm going to make a call. I talk to mom or dad, and then I talk to staff and like, yeah, let me talk to them. I think they might be interested in it. Okay, they are interested in it. But as staff, I'm not a writer. Could you help with this? Okay, then let's go to McDonald's and set up this time and make sure we have transportation everywhere. And let's look at this application. And you know, let's make sure that what you are putting in this application is reflective of what you want to say, but I'll type it, you know, because you might have trouble with typing, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you get accepted to the journal, then you got to be checking your email again. You know, I'm kind of going on and on, but it's a lot of work. That's one example of what that looks like. And that's sort of what helping our apprentices work alongside the college students that we hire looks like in our classes. Sometimes with that anecdote, I just wish we could say, hey, we've already done a lot of that work, that kind of interdependent creation to make this content. Can we submit that and explain a little context around it as you know, as an organization? And we might get an answer like, well, we'd rather hear from the person with a disability than just the organization, which I get. And also when people are saying things like that, I feel like they're not understanding all of that kind of interdependent collaborative work it would take to access something like that and how that is a barrier. Anyway, so the point is, it's work. but it's also beautiful. Next slide. To call back to the beginning of the seminar, the forum, when we're asking about what the possibility of an accessible world is, I am drawing on our experience, not only now working with teachers who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, or of course from my personal life and my brother, but we've now had some of those folks go on to be on our own advisory board, or serve in fellowships at the University of Minnesota, or testify in front of the Minnesota legislature about sub-minimum wage that can still be paid for people with disabilities. And I know that is unpredictable. It takes a little bit of give and take. It is fun. It is joyful. It is very interdependent. Like that woman in the video from the college I talked about, our program feels so much more complete, and we would never go back. We would never have it any other way. And so we've only been doing this for 4 years. And by now we have 20 folks who have been students turned into teachers. Just with each year, we've kind of find what that collective power of the group is, and what potential there is moving forward. So we're excited to keep building on that. The images of a young man with disabilities in a tie-dye shirt, fist raised in the air, talking into a microphone with some roses on a table and a bunch of art behind him, representing disability in power. So that's me.
Great, thank you. This is Scott again. Thank you so much, Bryan. Really lovely to learn more about your work. Although I knew a lot of it, I'll be honest. But every time I hear you talk about it, I pick up something new, and really appreciate your orientation to all of this. These presentations were so wonderful, and we did want to have a little bit of time for questions, so I will push it to Sam, my colleague, who will facilitate a question or two.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Hey, y'all. I am Sam Stallman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a white woman with short blonde hair and glasses, and I have a blurred background turned on. So I will be facilitating questions for our wonderful crew of panelists. If you have any questions, please place them in the chat. And I want to go back up to one came through, and this was for you, Jess. And it came from Donna, who asked, is Fresh Eye a studio space to train us to be curator of our arts, progressing us as artists, using our voice in your studio and the community?
That is a really great question. I think that we want to create spaces that where you get to decide if that's something that an artist wants to do. If someone comes to us wanting to learn certain aspects of curating, we will support that through facilitation. But yeah, we provide a variety of opportunities for, and I'm thinking right now about curating. There's like multiple types of curating. So I'm just wondering if your question is connected to curating your portfolio and deciding what to make, or curating an art show. We do both of those kinds of things because we have the art studio spaces and we have the gallery. The art show. Donna says the art show. Yes. Yes, at Fresh Eye Arts, we have supported folks who are interested in learning how to curate a show. We used to have a partnership with the Show Gallery in St. Paul, and I think quite a few artists, that was when Chloe was with us, helped facilitate curating art shows. And this space here at Fresh Eye Gallery, we have had a variety of shows curated by artists with disabilities, and we'll continue to do that going forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a question in the chat from Joby Lynn saying, I'm wondering, how do we use these organizations? Is Fresh Eye another organization like Avivo where we can be referred by one of our case managers? Does cow tipping publish for those of us who are disabled, or just through their programs? And specifically, it looks like Joby Lynn wants to publish a children's book, which is super exciting.
Well, I can answer the first question about Fresh Eye or Vivo. So there is a difference between Fresh Eye and Avivo. So Avivo is an absolutely free program for Avivo Artworks. I don't work for Avivo anymore, but I'm going to plug and I'm going to try to refer people there because I think it's an amazing resource in Hennepin County. So Avivo Artworks supports artists living with mental illness in Hennepin County. So you have to be living in that county and it's free. So you have to go through an intake process and one has to be working with a mental health provider that can verify that they're living with a mental illness. Fresh Eye Arts is part of a day habilitation program. Our parent organization is MSS. And so folks who access Fresh Eye Arts, they access that through a CADI waiver, waivered funding. And that is something a case manager can help someone refer into. We are opening a new studio program in St. Paul, which we're really excited about. So we have a wait list for that program. We should be starting it soon. Fresh Eye Gallery is an extension of Fresh Eye Arts. And so we have created a community art space open to all. And so folks, we have an open call for art. We encourage people to come to our openings, our events, become part of the community. We want to get to know you. So we're at 42nd and Nicolette. You can find us at fresheyegallery.com. I don't have to pay to participate in Fresh Eye Gallery. We want everyone to be part of this community.
Yep, and quick answer for cow tipping. All of our classes take place in groups and are usually arranged on kind of the organizational level. So for instance, if there's an organization that you are served by and we partnered with them, you could be one of the students in a class that then ends up with a published book. Sometimes we also have, when we partner with orgs, they want to make that open enrollment. There are actually 3 coming up this summer where anyone can sign up. And so I was gonna say I could drop a link, but it's an email, so I'm not to forward that. But I can get that information to people. It's on our Facebook for sure. And in terms of publishing stuff that people just come to us with, unfortunately, we don't have capacity for that. It'd be wonderful if we did, but we publish what comes out of the classes, and that kind of helps make us sustainable. But we do, which I will drop in the chat, have a link, because it's a very common question, with a bunch of other resources you might think about or consider if that is of interest to you. So I'll throw that in the chat.
Thanks, Brian. This is Sam. I just want to also mention that we will be sending everyone who registered for the Zoom a sheet of other resources. So we'll be sure to add those. So please keep your email out for that. There's one more question that I wanted to end on from John. And Mai, I'll maybe start with you and then go to Jess and then Brian. And the question is, are funders and donors keeping up with your needs to grow your programs or your art or your work? Are there any wishes of what you'd like to see?
It's a great question. And this is Mai. I know that more recently, funders have starting to center disability and arts more and more, right? Whereas, folks with disabilities weren't they were just an afterthought, even if that, maybe a decade ago or so. And, I follow a lot of, not just in the artist world, but, in the philanthropy world in general, because I've done a lot of work with foundations as board member or volunteer or whatever, but philanthropy groups, I think in general, have really been focused on disability work as of late, because folks with disabilities have been giving their voice to that, right? Hey, we are artists, we are performers, and our stuff deserves to be, we need money to do our stuff. So I think that one thing I'll just encourage folks to continue to do is, if you're an artist with a disability, continue to voice that, because that is so important. I know that they have funded artists before, in the past. I don't know how often they fund disabled artists, but like the Ford Foundation, the president of the Ford Foundation literally just said, I have never really thought of disabled folks in our funding before, and that's obviously changing, right? Because the Ford Foundation has done lots of really great work around disability now. But like, we have to sort of like really get people out of that mindset, right? And I think the good work of everybody at like MRAC and Bryan and Jess, like all of y'all, I'm not an artist, so I'm just gonna like be transparent about that and like own that. But I do know that it's changing, and I think it's just gonna get better and better. So I would encourage disabled artists to continue to voice what it is that you all need in order to really like have a space for yourself, right, in our community.
Awesome. Thanks, Mai. I can take over on my side of things. I think about funding all of the time. And I feel like it's a hustle. Like, I think when you're working in the nonprofit world and you're working in mission-based programming, it can be really difficult because we are depending on grants, donors, but I feel like there are other ways, like, resource building. Does it always have to be this way? Do we always have to look towards a grant to get something done? Right now, that's how the structures are built, but I feel like we can be more innovative in that approach. But one thing I feel like with Fresh Eye is we have been fortunate that we are part of a larger nonprofit, that we are not our own arts organization. So that has been beneficial in many ways. And we're also an organization that really likes to test ideas. We don't always play by the rules, so I feel like we try to do things differently. But also, I just want to say one more thing about funding is it's not always about maybe what we're looking to do. How do we, like with funders, what are they trying to fund? They have their own mission too. And so what I think about is, that there's trends in funding. We know that folks right now that they're looking to, fund programs for artists with disabilities, people with disabilities, and making sure that this is accessible. But also funders are looking for ways to create support structures for artists and resource building for artists. And so how, as we as art organizations or groups respond to that? We're already doing that work. So how do we shape our language around to support that? So that's kind of where I'm at. And I think we're thinking about that here at Fresh Eye. Lauren Hughes is our arts development director. So I'm sure she would have more to add to this. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, good question, John. I see some nice stuff in the chat too. But just to speak from Katsiving's perspective, I think a good thing for funders to understand is there's a lot of money out there for disability services, right? Mostly flowing through DHS, and the route we have taken is to not be on waivers or be reimbursed by DHS, because that affords us a lot of freedom. Much easier to decide, okay, next month, actually, we're going to do this radical change where we hire our former students, and we don't have to worry about, well, will that be a HIPAA violation, and could they pass meds, and if someone has to be in a wheelchair, will that teacher with Down syndrome be able to do it, or is it a liability? We can just kind of move nimbly. The flip side is we really have to hustle for those dollars. It is Minnesota's arts funding that has helped us be who we are. Shout out to the Legacy Amendment, MRAC, et cetera, and kind of marshal that toward a more forward-thinking form of disability inclusion. And then the other, but yeah, so just knowing the difference between those when thinking about funding. And then I think the other trend I've noticed is more bringing disability justice principles into funding, which by and large I think is wonderful. A lot of let's prioritize organizations that are led by people with disabilities, led by the most marginalized. And I would just add an asterisk to that back to kind of my point of, especially when thinking about that 2%, that intellectual and developmental disability, work and progress often means working with forward-thinking, conscientious allies and not just on your own. And that sometimes that means it's going to be nothing about us without us doesn't mean only us, you know, it's nothing about us without us, and there's other people in the mix, and that that can be what it takes to get folks who are often, again, often on the sidelines into mainstream spaces, and that's just a little messier than a neat, like, okay, is everything run by people with disabilities? Great, we've checked that box. So, but I also like in the chat what people are saying about alternative forms of applications, places where you can do a grant by like leaving a voicemail or making a collage. Friggin' love it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This is Scott again. Thank you all so much for being here, for spending an extra 8 minutes with us. Also, really rich conversation. Appreciate all the perspectives coming in the chat as well, which we will save and also make available, so folks watching this later can also check that out. Lots of good resources folks are bringing forward. I want to thank our captioner Megan, our interpreter Maria. I want to thank Sam Stallman so much for doing the heavy lift of making this event happen. And I especially want to thank our panelists, Mai, Jess, and Bryan, for bringing your perspectives forward. And lastly, I guess I want to thank everyone who made time to be on this call today, and future people for making time to watch it as well. Time is a precious resource, especially for people with disabilities, and I appreciate you spending some of it with us. With that, I think we'll close out this event, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Have a good night.